So here's the South Carolina jury instruction on self-defense. And it's a standard type of structure for self-defense. Again, it encompasses the 5 elements of self-defense. But, finding jury instructions for states can be tricky. Statutes are just about always available on the internet. You don't need anything special. Jury instructions can be pretty tricky to find. A lot of states don't make them readily available. Texas makes you buy them for $500 a year. Thank you, Texas. Of course, as a lawyer, we have a professional legal database. We use Lexis here in my office, but so we can get the jury instructions, but it costs us thousands of dollars a year to have that Lexis account. So the law exists in South Carolina. Self-defense law exists. You don't find it in statute. And in particular, for purposes of this discussion, South Carolina has, as near as I can tell, no law that I can find on defense of least defensible property. So let's talk a little bit about that. I have a slide deck here. This is pulled from as you know, we have state-specific courses on the use of force law of each individual state. This happens to be the South Carolina slides that we use for our South Carolina specific class. If you're interested in the specific self-defense law of your particular state, it's pretty easy to get. Just go to lawofselfdefense.com/state. I don't have it here. Or become a Law of Self-Defense Platinum member and for 82 cents a day, and get your choice of any 3 state-specific courses as part of that package. Check that out at lawofselfdefense.com/82 cents. Now, one of the things we always talk about when I teach defense of property is I caution strongly against getting involved in defense of at least personal property, least defensible property, because you're incurring a tremendous amount of legal risk. You could end up spending the rest of your life in prison. You could end up killed in the confrontation. And I generally urge people not to get into fights they don't need to get into. So if you can, consistent with your own safety, not have to get into a fight, especially a gunfight over least defensible property, that's probably the prudent way to go. But I don't tell people what to do. I only try to help you make an informed decision. Now, when I say least defensible property, you may be wondering what I mean by that. For use of force law purposes, we can really divide property into 2 buckets: least defensible and highly defensible. And least defensible is just stuff like your cell phone, open, unimproved land, pets. Sorry, folks, with the pets, I know you feel legitimately like the pets are just as much a member of the family as the humans in your family. Maybe more than the humans in the family, I guess, depending on the humans in your family. But for use of force law purposes, they are least defensible property. Unoccupied vehicles, least defensible property. And if we're talking defense of least defensible property, you can only use non-deadly force in defense of least defensible property, except in Texas. Texas is the only state that has a provision that allows for the use of deadly force in defense of least defensible property. I still urge you not to do it even in Texas, but the exception should be noted. Texas Penal Code 9.42. But the other 49 states, if we're talking least defensible property, the only thing you can use is non-deadly force. Now, if we're talking highly defensible property, you may be privileged to use deadly force. Highly defensible property always includes your dwelling or residence. It often includes your place of work. That varies a lot by state. It often includes an occupied vehicle. And generally what the law does in the context of highly defensible property is create a legal presumption that you've met the necessary conditions for the use of deadly force in self-defense if you're dealing with a genuine intruder into that highly defensible property. For our purposes, the distinction today is between just someone's committing a simple trespass on land as opposed to someone's making a forcible entry, unlawful entry into highly defensible property. Now, back to the South Carolina. So, what statutes, jury instructions, case law was I able to find in South Carolina on the question of how much force you can use in defense of least defensible property? I can't find anything. Literally nothing. Now, they do have statutes that address the question of the use of force, particularly deadly force, in defense of highly defensible property. They adopted those statutes only in 2006, so not very long ago, but they do have those. They do have a statutory framework for the defense of highly defensible property, but I can't find anything for the defense of least defensible property. So there's no statutes that I could find. There's no case law that I could find. Now, that's kind of understandable in the sense that when we say case law, what we really mean are appellate court decisions. And there's lots of, especially lower level crimes that never are heard by the appellate courts. They're just not important enough. And if they're never heard by the appellate courts, there would be no case law created. And least defensible property, like a simple trespass on open land under South Carolina law, is a misdemeanor. The most you can serve is 30 days. And that would be in a county jail. So how many of those get appealed? I mean, probably none of them. Or you could pay a fine alternatively. So most people probably pay the fine. I think it's a couple $100. It's not a lot of money. So how many people are going to appeal that? Go through thousands of dollars to appeal that when they can just pay the $200 fine and have it over with. So no South Carolina law on defense of least defensible property, at least that I was able to find. And that's not common.